Is COVID-19 going to cause massive inflation? This topic has already been discussed by numerous YouTubers, but they either provide bookish theories that are difficult to understand, or they're left with more questions than answers. In this video, I will explain why printing money in 2008 didn't cause inflation. I will do a step-by-step analysis on the causes of low inflation for the past 4 decades, and why BridgeWater's associate CO-CIO Jenson said, inflation and currency risk is the biggest risk ahead investors should pay attention to. Either prior to the dot-com bubble or after the Fed's printing money in 2008 financial crisis, economists were worried about the inflation spike, but it never came. Since the 2008 financial crisis, even with a lot of inflation hype, the world's central banks were struggling to get inflation up to 2%. Today, investors largely ignore the risk of inflation because it hasn't happened for almost 40 years. It's not unusual they can't really relate in a world with extremely low inflation. But smart investors have already made the moves to position for potential inflation hikes. For example, gold is the second largest holding in Ray Dalio's portfolio. I'm not saying the reason behind Ray Dalio's position is uniquely due to inflation, but in my opinion, inflation and currency risk is one of the crucial factors behind Ray Dalio's gold holdings. I will explain more in detail about Ray Dalio's positions in the later part of the video. Hey friends, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Alvin. I make economic and finance related videos to explain what's going on in this crazy world. I offer knowledge, strategies, and tools to help you navigate and build your financial well-being. Before we dive in, if you don't know what inflation is and how inflation affects your everyday life, make sure to check out this video where I explain all the basics of how inflation works. Immediately after the Fed printed trillions of dollars during the financial crisis, people were worried that the massive inflation was coming. You would think if there's so much money out there chasing the same amount of goods, prices would certainly rise. This is also how mainstream economics explains the relationship between money creation and inflation. Unfortunately, it lacks many details and fails to explain why printing money in 2008 didn't cause inflation. In order to understand why printing money didn't cause inflation, the critical link people missed is where the money goes. The normal boom and bust cycle ends in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. Prior to the crisis, big banks were making home loans for people who didn't have enough income to cover their mortgages. Then they bundled these mortgages into one complex financial product called mortgage-backed security, which is just a fancy way of saying a bunch of mortgages. People in big banks think these so-called securities will never default because of crazy diversification. Big banks like Lehman Brothers were piling these dangerous products onto their balance sheet until people started to realize those who own these mortgages don't have money in their pocket to pay their dues. Mortgage value began to drop. Debt has another name, asset. They're essentially the same thing, just on different people's hand. For example, when you buy a house, you take out a mortgage of $200,000. To you, it's debt. To bank, it's asset. An asset is just a draw on somebody's future income. This asset needs you to have a job to generate sustainable income to pay back the debt. If you can't pay back the $200,000 plus interest, bank's income falls. Then your bank may want to sell your mortgage to some other bank or investors. But because of the income for the mortgage is not trustworthy, bank can only sell the mortgage for a lesser value, say $100,000. Mortgage value drops because the income source for the mortgage is not reliable. What comes next is default. What about when hundreds, thousands, or millions of mortgages were all defaulted at the same time? Remember, asset is just a draw on somebody's future income. If not enough income is created to feed the asset eventually worth nothing. This is what happened during the financial crisis because people's greed and deregulation of financial corporations gave push to the rising property value. Mortgage value as a part of that property value also increased. Until people realized the income source is not trustworthy, these assets' value fell to zero. When asset value falls, it creates a big hole in bank's balance sheet. we might as well give the whole a fancy name, asset-liability mismatch. Here's where the magic happens, the intricacies you heard about the big corporate bailout, as well as why there was no inflation when the Fed printed massive amount of money. People need to go out and spend on the actual products and services to create inflation. But the printed money by the central bank was not handed to you and me, the consumers, but to fill the big hole in corporate's balance sheet. Money was created out of thin air and directly credited to bank's bank account. This is where you hear the technical jargon, quantitative easing or QE. It's just another fancy name for a massive creation of money by the central bank. So why was there no inflation? Because when credit disappears in the financial system, money was created to fill the missing credit instead of distributing to the hands of people who ultimately spend and drive inflation. Was there inflation? If you think about the financial market, I think there is, because that's where the money goes. What we can learn from this is there's no direct relationship between printing money and inflation, because inflation doesn't include assets but only consumables. In order to create inflation, money needs to be spent on actual products and services. If you'd like to know what products and services are included in calculating inflation, make sure to check out above video where I explain the basics of inflation. Although cost-push inflation and demand-pull inflation is able to explain inflation in the short term, it fails to explain why inflation was consistently trending lower for multiple decades. I'm going to show you a video where BridgeWater Associates CO-CIO explains what created low inflation for the past 4 decades. Then I will do a step-by-step analysis of the shift he mentioned. In the video, Jenson mentioned 4 deflationary pressures which caused low inflation. 3 of them have already turned.
Because like you said, everybody's so used to deflationary pressures for the last 35, 40 years that it's a wind at the back of financial markets, that it's easy to forget what caused the wind and how would you know if it's changing, right? So when you look backwards, what caused the decline in inflation from 1980, the early 80s through today? That there was a transition, Volcker-led transition in monetary policy to fight inflation, point 1. Point 2 is with that, you also had a huge degree of globalization that allowed lower labor costs to be taken advantage of all over the world. You also had a massive boom, particularly in the second half of that, in technology that was very deflationary. And through that period, you built up debts, and debts themselves are calls on future income that are deflationary. So all of those things, that's kind of the backdrop of the things that were causing the big deflationary waves. Now, many of them have already turned. The deflationary part of globalization, I would say, is probably plateaued at best and potentially worsening, where it had been a deflationary wave. Now you see all the challenges with supply chains and the movement from sort of the most efficient possible supply chains to more resilient supply chains, and the movement away from globalization and the risk of tariffs that already have started but could become a bigger part of the global economy. So the deflationary impact of globalization is certainly at risk. The central banking decision to keep high real interest rates to drive inflation down has certainly flipped. The view among central bankers that inflation is even mainly a cyclical phenomenon is not really there. That when we come to is this slowdown going to cause a fall in deflation? It's worth thinking about the 10-year improvement in the economy over the last 10 years and why that didn't cause much of an increase in inflation. So it's not so much the cycle that's driving it. It's these big things: globalization, the central bank policy, fiscal policy, and then the movement in technology. Now, the only thing that really stands out as continuing to be deflationary is the technology story that continues on.
So the 4 deflationary factors Jenson mentioned are: first, central bank policy. The view among central bankers that business cycle drives inflation has changed. In the past, when the economy is hot, central bank increase interest rate to fight inflation. When economy is sluggish, central bank lower interest rate to bring inflation back on track. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the world central banks were struggling to get inflation up to 2%. In August 2020, the Fed announced it will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. The word is subtle, but it signals a big shift in central bank's policy. Unlike making decisions around business cycle, central bank, which arguably is one of the biggest players in the financial market and the economy, shifted to intentionally advocate inflation. 2. Globalization. Since China opened up in 1978, the world was benefiting from cheap labor costs and global supply chain. Globalization drives prices down because of cheap labor and relatively free movement of goods and capital. But now, we've been seeing US and China trade war and technology war. US retreated from globalization, raising tariffs, China banning Australian coal, and all other deglobalization movements. As globalization retreats, deflationary becomes inflationary. 3. Debt. Debt is deflationary. When you have a mortgage, you have less room to spend. But if you save more and borrow less, it gives you more room to spend in the future, which makes the future inflationary. Between 1980 and 2008, US debt grows faster than its income. But since 2008, things have changed. People began to borrow less and save more relative to its income, which gives them more room to spend in the future. Deflationary turns into inflationary. 4. Technology. As Greg Jenson mentioned, technology continues to be deflationary because machines continue to develop. They're a lot more productive and cheaper. With all that being said, I'd just like to emphasize that the purpose of this video is not to predict the future, but to help you look objectively at the cause and effect relationship in history. Thanks a lot, guys. Hope you find this video valuable. Please leave a comment below if you have any questions or thoughts. Don't forget to like the video to give me a little boost on the YouTube algorithm. Hope to see you soon in the next video. Cheers!